Welcome, and thank you for listening in on our latest Economic Outlook report focusing on the recovery of the U.S. economy. Today, we'll be focusing specifically on extending benefits and stimulus, a topic all of us want to know more about and how it is likely to affect us. Leading today's economic update is Prevadare's chief economist, Andrew Duguay. Andrew, we're looking forward to your insights. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nicole. We come to this conversation in an interesting week. Technically, the unemployment benefits, the stimulus cliff, if you will, are set to expire in a couple days here at the end of the month. While we think it's a low probability that they will be set to expire without any sort of extension or revision, the path forward is still unclear, and we have a couple different options that are getting weighed in Congress, and we'll soon know more about the details. Today, we want to talk about how does this fit into the overall economic picture for the second half of the year. As we look towards the future, there's a lot of uncertainty, and part of this economic outlook is talking about economic recovery. And I think we can't reiterate this enough, that the recovery really starts when we can control the pandemic, because the pandemic was the essential cause of this global economic crisis. If we can't get over the pandemic, we can't really get one foot forward into the economic recovery in earnest. So there are certain things that we can do as an economy, from federal and fiscal policy to remediate certain ailments that the economy is facing in the near term, but a long sustainable recovery is not possible without a safe and healthy economic environment from which to do business in. So we always like to start with looking at the number of cases, and it's been largely bad news for the United States. Unlike many other countries that are controlling the pandemic, we have seen our cases rise, and this is obviously no news to anyone. Looking at a 7-day moving average kind of smooths out some of that daily volatility, and so I like showing you this view. We might have reached the second plateau, but it's much higher than the first plateau back in April, when we thought maybe we were over the worst of this. So here we are again, looking forward to cases declining and thinking about how do we reopen and what's the safe process for reopening, while hopefully not reopening too soon. I think we've been learning lessons, perhaps the hard way in some areas, about reopening too aggressively, and that you can actually face more economic pain by trying to be too aggressive with those actions than not. So it's with this backdrop that we again say that the outlook, it has a lot to do with this still, right? That it's hard to forecast in earnest about what that likely scenario is for economic recovery, regardless of stimulus, if the pandemic crisis does not subside. And this isn't just a US phenomenon. We're also seeing very much rising cases in India, Brazil. A lot of emerging nations, emerging markets are seeing rising cases, and this is impacting economic growth in those areas too. So while we're focused mainly on the US economy, it's not necessarily a US isolated issue on its own. So let's talk about the immediate next steps, and that is we have a stimulus package that is in the works. And part of this is going to be extending the $600 a week federal unemployment top-up, which the US economy has grown to rely on quite heavily, with over 25 million people on unemployment. And collecting this is actually becoming a major part of the economic engine of people's ability to spend or pay their mortgage or make ends meet. The stakes are high. This is accounting for about 15% of total wages right now, which is not an insignificant number. And that 25 million people is a very large number. Just for some comparison's sake, what we're looking at with jobless claims right now, we're still at over 1 million new jobless claims every single month. And this is obviously several months after the pandemic started. and businesses were forced to shut down. So you can think about a lot of these are secondary caused by the pandemic in terms of poor business performance, is causing more of these layoffs and more people to file for unemployment. At the peak of the last recession, 2008, 2009, which used to be known as the Great Recession, I guess we could call this the Greater Recession, jobless claims never surpassed 675,000 in a given week. And here we are at the end of July, and according to last Thursday's numbers, we're still seeing jobless claims around 1.4 million in the past week. And the timing of this could not come at a worse time when we're talking about unemployment benefits expiring, because this new jobless claims number was actually the first increase that we've seen since we hit that peak with the initial shutdown of the economy back in April. This is the 1.42 million is actually 109,000 person increase from the week before. And this is a reflection of what we were showing in the previous slide, the rise in new cases, the fact that we've needed to shutter previously opening businesses and more people are filing for unemployment. And so the impacts of the fading of the stimulus and the unemployment benefits is real. So what the reactions though from both the Republicans and the Democrats are also real. So when we're talking about what is going to happen, I think what we're really looking at is a range of options between what the Republicans are proposing, the Democrats are proposing, and both of them are it's pretty much between $1 and $3 trillion that's being proposed as the next stimulus. So when we talk about the fear of unemployment benefits expiring, I think it's low probability that they expire, or at least for anywhere longer than a week. And the higher probability is that we narrow in on some negotiated package that's between the Republicans and the Democrats. And they are, while they're $2 trillion apart, I think the number to focus on is that it's a lot of money either way, right? When we look at the previous Great Recession, I'm going to keep referring back to that to put some of this into context. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the ARRA, was the big stimulus package of the day. That didn't even reach $1 trillion. Now we're just talking about a top-up extended stimulus package that's going to be over $1 trillion on top of the nearly $2 trillion that was proposed a few months ago and got passed with the CARES Act. So we are seeing unprecedented aggressive levels of stimulus in this recession, no matter how you look at it. And so that should give some comfort to, I guess, those worried about the impacts of those who have lost their jobs and the high rate of unemployment at this moment. Just think about the context that we're in is that the federal response, regardless of which package gets passed, will be by historic standards, much more aggressive than we've seen in pretty much all of history. So what does this matter for the near term? And does it matter? I think when it comes to this very specific $600 a week, it does matter a lot. And here's the reason why. A lot of stimulus can often get caught up in the fact that you can send people money, but if people are fearful of the economy or their safety, right, they might just put it in a bank. And a lot of previous stimulus actions, including the mailing of checks, have often been criticized by the fact that, hey, this actually doesn't do much good besides increase the federal government debt, because people take money in times of crisis and they do the logical thing and they sock it away for a rainy day, which is okay, but it doesn't necessarily boost spending, retail sales, or boost the economy in any sort of tangible, immediate way. With the $600 a week in unemployment benefits, though, what we are seeing is that if you do target, people who have lost jobs in this way, a lot of that actually does get spent, right? Because it's covering expenses that are ongoing, such as rent and groceries and other things. And so it actually does translate into spending. And the fact that that $600 a week, it has been more than a replacement for over 50% of those who are unemployed, increasing their wages versus the wages they were earning on average before they lost their job, means that they're actually sitting with more money to spend and in an actually better financial situation, all else aside, a better financial situation than they were before the crisis happened. And what this has meant is that you've actually seen studies where those people who have gotten those unemployment benefits are actually increasing their spending. And this is helping to offset those who are continuing to work, who have moved more in a more conservative fashion, right? Who have increased their savings rates in fear of a crisis. And JP Morgan Chase did a study on this, showing a case study of two different control environments of one of those newly unemployed and their change in spending over time. And their results compared to those who have not lost their jobs since COVID happened has shown that those who are newly unemployed and therefore getting the new generous unemployment benefits have actually increased their spending about 10% since the crisis happened and they lost their jobs. Meanwhile, those who have had no change in employment are still working, have gone more conservative, as is expected during a recession, and have decreased their spending by 10%. So I think this is an interesting trend. If you take away the unemployment benefits, not only are you putting individuals in a financially precarious spot, but if we want to think about the economy as a whole, there will be negative ramifications for total retail spending, which could have a negative effects on many jobs and many businesses and many industries. So in many ways, this is actually a more impactful stimulus bailout, if you will, to try to boost the economy. This type of stimulus tends to actually be more impactful than many other types of stimulus, which might just end up in savings. So aside from whether, again, this is like ethics aside, more just an economics look that, hey, if we don't extend these benefits, I think there's two factors going on. One, people tend to spend these benefits. And so if people are no longer have this money, we are going to see a lot more economic crisis numbers increase, and the economy is going to be in a more precarious spot in terms of GDP growth and the like for the second half of the year. I think the second thing is that as we're looking at this, regardless of whether the Democrat or the Republican bill gets passed, I think what we're seeing is that benefits are going to continue. It just might be in a different fashion. So it might not be the flat $600, right? You might see an adjustment towards incomes, and all those things I think are okay. A lot of European countries have successfully through this crisis with those type of policies tied to some percentage of your pre-COVID income. And I think that's a reasonable response as well, rather than a flat number. We know that logistically, I think it was due to logistic reasons and being able to get the unemployment benefits out quickly that we settled on a flat number, which economically doesn't really make much sense, right? Because some people are receiving more than what they were when they're working, which can create some disincentives. Various studies on that, which I won't go into, but either way, in a crisis like this with really high rates of new jobless claims and the fact that we have not controlled the pandemic means that we still probably need to treat the situation just like we would have several months ago in terms of forms of stimulus to soften the blow of the economic crisis. So assuming stimulus goes through, what does the second half of the year look like? I think it's still a slog, right? We still have many uphill battles to face here in the US and around the world. And economically, historically, what we've seen is that it takes 4 to 5 times as long to get jobs back that jobs were lost in any sort of crisis, whether that's a pandemic or a financial crisis or a stock market bubble burst. New jobs tend to take longer to create than old jobs tend to get lost. And so we do need to be thinking about, even though we see sharp declines in April followed by rapid increases in May and June and July, and some of these economic indicators which might make this feel like a V-shaped recovery, what I think we're still going to see, and what we've talked about in a couple of our previous sessions, is that it's going to be more choppy and W's, and we're calling those micro recoveries and micro recessions, and we're going to see that play out. I truly believe, even with the passing of stimulus, we're going to see that play out in many industries over the next few months. In light of all this uncertainty, as we look towards the second half of the year, we know that this is about the time that many businesses are really thinking about their annual operating plans, thinking about not just the second half of the year, but really what is their 2021 outlook going to be. And this is the time where a lot of that legwork for businesses begins, and becomes intensely real. And I think there's been no more challenging year to make this annual operating plan than in 2020 because of all this uncertainty. So we are still encouraging people to think about their annual operating plans in terms of coming up with fact-based, data-driven scenarios, and really to be thinking about how they can adapt those scenarios as new information comes up. So we call this agile planning or continuous planning, right? The fact that you're going to come up with a plan today for the next year, or really 18 months when you think about it. And it's almost guaranteed that it's going to be wrong in some way, because there's so many unknowns about how the pandemic's going to play out, how federal stimulus is going to play out. And so part of good planning really needs to be that you're going to be able to adapt and change your plan on a continual basis, taking into account new information, these new data sets that are coming out that are rapid release and come out on daily or weekly frequency, and might give you that intelligence to adapt your plan and nudge it in one direction or another, and to be able to have that continuous planning process and build a practice around it in the business, so that you're not just locking in your numbers and heading towards a target and come to find out a few months later that that target needs to be moved, but the business can't move with it. So we call that agile planning, and we call it scenario planning, right? Coming up with a economic baseline with some high and low scenarios about what's reasonably going to happen, and have the company march towards that. We think that's still going to be a very important part of that annual operating plan over the next year. And we know a lot of businesses right now are starting to think about how they formulate those 2021 plans. So an important part of that is the fact that you're going to need to be able to adapt those plans and change those plans as you go, because new information is coming out daily.
Wow, thank you, Andrew. Great insights. Complex breakdown on the stimulus ramifications on those micro recessions and recoveries we've been talking about. And certainly nothing like waiting to the last minute, huh? So that concludes this economic update. If you have any questions for Andrew, please feel free to contact us at the information on the screen. Stay tuned for follow-up presentations. Thank you.